I went into I'm Not Okay With This wanting to like it. When episode 1 began, I sought out all the good things about it. Visually, I thought it looked pretty good. I liked the two main actors, Sophia Lillis, who played Sydney, and Wyatt Olaf, who played Stanley. And I thought it had a good sense of humor sometimes that created some pretty funny moments. But soon after these things, there was nothing else good to be sought out. Pretty quickly into the first episode, the biggest problem I have with this show became obvious, which is, this show feels extremely cliche. It follows this formula I feel like I've seen 100 times before. From the outside, it looks different. When you watch it, you realize you've already seen this show, just an altered version of it. I think the best example of this is the characters. Sydney, a different from the other girls outcast who's moody and says fuck a lot. Stanley, an eccentric weirdo who likes vinyl and has deep thoughts and is unpopular in the show's world but would be popular in real life. Dina, the outcast's BFF who is really cool and is either already popular or becoming popular and cares about dumb things like boys and makeup. I want to add that the comment about boys and makeup being dumb was sarcastic. The show portrays those things as dumb. And a jock named Brad, which is all I need to say about that character. After this problem and then others became apparent, it became hard to get through the episode, a trend which would continue, partly due to being bored and partly due to it just making me cringe. For this reason, amongst others. Like, for example, the overly angsty teenage edge nature of the show, which I really started picking up on in episode 2. Now, this is not an inherently bad thing. It actually should be expected in media that focuses on teenagers. The problem here is it just becomes way too much. It feels like it's there for these teens experiencing that angst and edgy phase of their life to either attract them or cater to them, rather than being there for any good storytelling reason. It's a shame because when that isn't at the forefront, there are some rare good moments, whether it comes from a character or from the show's small town setting, which makes for nice locations that give off good and fitting vibes. Come episode 3, elements appear or become more obvious that make the show feel less generic. I thought the show would go upwards from here and subvert expectations after setting up something that felt so done before. But these small elements are all there is, and the overwhelming formulaic nature of this show overshadows and has more impact than they do. So really, it's not even all that much worth mentioning this. I will give I'm Not Okay With This credit for its ability to create these intentionally awkward moments that began in episode 3 that felt real and made me feel that awkwardness despite not being invested in any aspects of the show. Also, both episode 2 and 3 are better than 1 by a bit, simply because 1 was this painstaking rush of setting things up, and there was some of that rushedness in episode 2, but it was marginally more enjoyable than 1. Now, by the time I got to episode 4, there didn't feel like there would be much more to say at this point. It was just a boring, uninteresting show. Until I picked up on something that could be tied to the clichéness of this show. And that is the fact that this show is so predictable, to the point where it's laughable. And I'm not only talking about big plot points or twists or whatever, which are also predictable, but I'm also talking about even the tiniest, meaningless things. There's a scene in one of these episodes where Sydney's little brother makes her mac and cheese. It looks gross, and everything he put in it sounds gross, and she's scared to try it, but doesn't want to hurt his feelings. And I thought, she's gonna actually like it, isn't she? And yes, of course, she actually liked it, because the show is predictable as shit. It has to sound ridiculous, ranting about a mac and cheese scene, but I had to use an example of this frustrating problem that pops up throughout the show. What is the point of watching something that has the framework, the core, of something I've seen 100 times before? Especially when I, someone who is bored and uninterested in the show, can predict every little bump in the road. Now, episode 5. Thank God for this episode. This is the best episode of the show. It starts off with some more really well done intentional awkwardness, and the funny parts of this episode are the funniest in the show, and they also don't act as a brief, giggle-length break from a boring episode, but something good in something good. And the conflicts and the character chemistry in this episode is great and interesting. There is a one-off character in this episode named Jenny, who was embarrassingly overacted at first, but I liked her addition overall, and she added to the episode positively. A strange little thing that happened in both this episode and the one before is Stanley acting very out of character for just a moment. Both times, he'll be mad or upset when just a second ago, he was his normal, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, excitable self. This happens a few times with some other characters in the show, but I don't want to get into all of that. Also, I knew the janitor would be gay. I would blame this on the predictability of the show, but I like this episode, so I'll just put it on my magical foresight powers. Episode 6 starts off following in 5's footsteps as far as improving goes. We have very interesting conflicts and character dynamics going on. Stanley gets mad again, and it makes sense for the first time. And then, unfortunately, we are back to where we were before. Half of this episode focuses on what I think is supposed to be a twist. I honestly couldn't tell because it was so goddamn predictable. Not to the T, of course, but the gist of it. And the way it unfolded was so stupidly convenient. I hated it. And finally, the final episode, 7. I predicted the ending from the start of the episode. At this point, that was how I got my small amount of enjoyment from the show, by calling it out, then watching exactly what I expected to happen. There's nothing left to say about this show. It was boring and uninteresting, formulaic and cliche, cringy and predictable. The good moments spread throughout are not enough to make it good. I looked through the graphic novel which the show is based on to see how similar it was, just out of curiosity. It had this charming Charlie Brown type art style and was much more straightforward, which is good for simple, short stories like this one so things don't feel rushed. And it wasn't angsty or cringy at all from what I saw. It was definitely better than the show, and I actually liked what I read. Part of me feels like it's just one of those things that doesn't translate well to screen, but another part of me feels like they changed things just to fit this Netflix TV formula that attracts teens, which has to be who the show is made for. And there's nothing wrong with being a teenager, prepubescent, who likes, I'm not okay with this. It might seem new to you where it seems generic and formulaic to me, or you may like the formula this show follows the same way I like the formula superhero movies can tend to follow. It is just not for me. All that being said, I've never been happier to finish a show. There were only 7 episodes, and each were only 20 minutes, and it took me forever to get through. If everything else I just said doesn't tell you how much I was not okay with I'm not okay with this, I'm sorry, I had to. That should. It's not awful, but it's not good. I give it 1.5 stars out of 5.